Thank you very much. It's a special privilege to be here in Eretz Yisrael. We know Torah Eretz Yisrael is special, is b'miuchad. But I'll start, with a story that happened to me this time here in Eretz Yisrael that I think can only happen here in Eretz Yisrael. You'll tell me if I'm wrong. So I got out of the airport on Friday morning, and I had a reservation for a car rental. Now my reservation was for $229. It's supposed to be including insurance. I was supposed to have to pay $12 extra a day if I want on top of it, the top of insurance. I get into the car rental place. I'm not going to mention the name of the rental, but it would probably happen with any of them. And they wanted $495. They figured out their math a little bit differently than mine, and then my reservation had on paper. So I made a cheshbon that my 6 days here in this country, how many taxis am I going to need? It doesn't pay to rent a car. So I went back out to the line of the Monitzar, and on the way there I call an Israeli friend of mine, and I tell him how much, they're going to rip me off, I'm an American. How much am I supposed to be paying for a monit from the airport to Yerushalayim? He tells me it's about 200 shekel for private monit now with the traffic. This was 9 o'clock in the morning. So I said, no problem. I get online, there's a lady standing at the front of the dispatch. You could go to the park. There's a lady standing at the front of the line. I tell her, Kallah Yerushalayim. She tells me, Alamone. So the driver looks at me, the first one online waiting, like this. So I tell them, $60. First of all, $60. The lady goes, Alamone. Goes, Ken, Alamone. There's a paper that they give you. But the $60. So we're in the cab, and he took it, $60. No, that's only $180. That's only 180 shekel, 185. So I was ready. I was starting at 60. I was ready for the Israeli marketplace to hit. We were driving to Yerushalayim, and good cab driving Yerushalayim. You're going to find out his whole life story twice on the way. And he tells me he lost his wife to corona a year ago. He has a daughter who's suffering from long haul corona, and his name is Yitzchak. He told me he never left Chutz La'aretz as long as he has seichel. He says when he was a little kid he left. He had come from Algeria when he was 6 years old, a Sephardi, lives in Ramla. He never left since he has seichel. Why? Avraham l'zav l'Mitzrayim. Yaakov l'zav l'Mitzrayim. Yitzchak nisha ba'aretz. Shem sheli Yitzchak, I remain in the Aretz. But that wasn't the point I wanted to tell you, that you'll only hear from an Israeli cab driver. So we were getting on the way close to Yerushalayim, and I asked him, if he's going to call the Sadran to get a fare back to the airport, what's his plans? He tells me, well, I'm going home. I said, I got up this morning, I needed to make $60, I should have money for chalot, for what I need, my food for Shabbat, and a little bit, he goes, you said $60, that's what I knew, in shekel, what he needed for the day. I'm going to make Shabbos. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. He could have Shabbat, the Shki is now 5:30, right? You're not talking about Ish Tzaddik, you're not talking someone who's going to dip in the mikvah 144 times, you're talking about, but that's it. He told me he heard $60, there wasn't for him to bargain. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent him, he was done. He's going back to buy his chalot, he's going back, he's to prepare, before he had lost his wife, to prepare for Shabbat. Only in Eretz Yisrael. Am I right? Some things we only have here in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara Megillah, the end of the Masechet Megillah talks about Kriyat Torah. And the Gemara says, if I speak too much Ashkenazi at any point, you'll stop me and I'll correct myself. I will try. I am a menahel in a Bet Sefer for Sfardim. So that's my day job, is I'm a menahel in a school for Kiruv Chokim in New York. It's mostly Bukharians, some Syrians, some Israelis. Only 3 Ashkenazim out of about Mot Chamishim Yehudim. So my Havara Sfardi lo kol kach tov. So if I say anything in Ashkenazi and you need any, not sure what I'm saying, please don't be afraid. Also, I'm going to try to leave time for questions at the end if you have any questions. So just, Rabbi Bamger didn't say much about me. So before I start, just to understand why he asked me to speak here. I was here and there at Stroh anyway, looking for yeshivot for my Talmidim coming, after high school. And a few months ago, I was zocheh to put out the first sefer in English on Hilchos Kriyat Torah. There was never a sefer available, a real sefer on Kriyat Torah. You have on Hilchos Shabbat more than you can imagine. On the kitchen, you have everything. There was never on Kriyat Torah. So it was very funny. Hashkacha Pratit. January before Corona, my father-in-law had passed away, and he was a Balkari for over 30 years. There was never anything. I said, you know what, let me start writing on it. I'd written 2 svarim on Shulchan Aruch, Otzar Shulchan, and Yoreh HaRav years ago when I was in Kallah. So let me start. I know how many years it was going to take me to write it. And then Corona hit. And I usually spend 3 hours a day in the car commuting between going to and from work, from my school to where I live in Passaic, New Jersey. So I got 3 hours extra a day. So Baruch Hashem, b'sof Corona, I was mukhan, and we'll be able to put it out. So that's why, if you're wondering why he asked me to speak today, that's why. So he called me this morning, he knew I was in Aretz. He said, he needs a small thing, could I stop by? So I put it in time, so I'm here. Now the Gemara Megillah says, I'm Rabbi Shfatya, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Asara shekaru b'Torah, Hagodol shebehem golel sefer Torah, Hagol lo notel schar kulan. Rabbi Yochanan tells us that when 10 people are reading from the Torah, what happens? The famous Gemara, the Gemara tells us the Gadol gets what they called back then Gelilah. We'll talk about today what Gelilah is later on. But whatever Gelilah is, whether it's Hagbah today, picking up the Sefer Torah, we don't do Gelilah, especially the Sfardim on the heavy one. You don't have, Ashkenazim have someone that goes Gelilah, right? So it's definitely talking about the Sfardim, the person that goes Hagbah. The Gadol Shebekulam. Now Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Asara shekaru b'Torah, 10 people who read from the Torah, Hagolel Sefer Torah, Kibel Schar Kulam. The guy who goes Gelilah, he's Kibel Schar Kulam. The Gemara asks, gets a schar of all of those who got all the aliyot, Ema Kibel Schar Keneged Kulam. He gets a schar, doesn't they get their schar, but he gets, if you add up all the schar of all of them together, he gets all that much schar from only going Hagbah. Now, if you were to ask a regular balabayit today, and I don't mean that in a negative way, why do you think it would be that we had to promise the guy who goes Hagbah such big schar? So unfortunately, most people would probably say, because it's so hard to get someone to go. Am I right? Look around. Right? If we were thinking on ourselves, and we're going to talk about that soon, about Kavod HaTorah, if we had to make our own Kavod HaTorah and our own level of where Hagbah would stand in our own minds, it would be close to the bottom. Right? So a typical person might say, it's because nobody wants to go. But it's not true. It's because it's the greatest kavod we'll see. Rashi says that why does it say asara? So really, Rashi's saying you give the gadol and all of the Beit HaKnesset. It's not the gadol of the asara. The gadol in the Beit HaKnesset gets hagbah. Right? But we say asara because you need a minimum of asara to read the Torah. Right? You need a minyan. Right? Tosfot says Lefisha Kvodo, the Gam Lefisha Gadol Shebekulan, Kedai Hi Litos Chak Neged Kulam. So it comes around Tosfot, and Tosfot adds this, that you give it to the Gadol. Because you give it to the Gadol, it's supposed to go to the Gadol. That's why Kedai Hi Litos Chak Neged Kulam. The Bali Itur says, he brings 2 pshatim. Ikemanda Ama, Asara Lav Dafka, El Gadol Shebebet HaKnesset. It's supposed to go to the Gadol in the Beis HaKnesset. V'ikimand dama asara dafka, shiva shakaru b'Torah, u'metargem, you used to have a metargem, u'maftir, on Shabbat you have an extra aliyah of maftir, v'shliach tzibur. Right? Shliach tzibur here means not what we call the chazan today, but probably the gabbai who called everybody up for aliyot, because then everyone read the Torah themselves. So one says that, like Rashi, the Balitur brings, that it's Asara lav dafka, but the Gadol gets it. And some say no, Asara dafka. And this comes out of Machloket, late Rishonim, early Achronim, where the Hagba'ah should go dafka to somebody who already got an aliyah. Right? Now those who understand that it's not a separate kibbud the way we do it today, but that originally it was dafka, one of those who got the aliyah would get Hagba'ah as well. The Ran says, "Afal pish ein korim b'Torah l'shiva, kivan she'ein korim b'Torah b'pachot me'asara, naket asara." That's like Rashi. Then he says, "V'yesh mi shekatav the mashmash hagadol she'ba'asara golel, afal pish lo kara." The Cholkin kavod legadol litoscha k'neged kulan. So he brings both pshatim once again. And the Mechaber Maran says, "Gadol she'ba'otam shakaru b'Torah golel v'regilu l'knoto b'damim yikarim l'chavev hamitzvah." So Maram Mechaber says, the Lashon sounds like it's one of those who read the Torah. Shabbatam shakaru b'Torah. That's who gets it. And the Mechaber brings that already back then, they sold it. That's how they raised money in the Beit HaKnesset. And Hagbah went, it seems like one of the most expensive aliyot. Right? We still do it. It's still most expensive kibbud?
No,
Right, so it sounds like, right?
But it's in the beginning, no? It's in the beginning. How do you know if he's going to go up to the Torah?
Well, so if you solo daliyot and you know, but also like, by the Sfardim especially, because by the Sfardim usually you give out in advance who's getting daliyot, right? You give out the petek, right? And then you get called up, But...
Meaning is the Gilila that you do in the beginning, or is that the different Gilila?
No, this is talking about L'chora, what the Sfardim do Hagbah in the beginning, and you show everybody Sefer Torah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because, if you look in Rabbi Ovadia, who says that, we'll talk more later about it if there's time, that, to keep the Sefer Torah open the whole way when you're walking from the Aron HaKodesh to the Bima, which not all Sfardim do, some don't. But if you do that, so then you're going to have to say, so then what's the Hagbah afterwards? So you can close it and you reopen it for everyone to look. Really, as you're walking, everyone's seeing. It seems a little bit superfluous for those that have the minhag to do it twice. Right? I mean, but a lot do it twice, am I right? The first they walk holding it.
It's the Syrians.
Syrians.
The Middle East, Sephardim, what they do is they walk with it open, and then it gets to the bima, he lifts it, and he goes like that.
Go like that, everybody to see.
Moroccans,
They walk it closed. Right, Bukhari so it's closed.
Once
then you lift it, right. Then another person points to where they're going to read. Right. Now, it's very interesting, the Vilna Gaon, he used to get an Aliyah and Hagbah every Shabbat. Okay, he got every Shabbat. When he was in Avel, so there's a whole sha'ila, which, whether an Avel who gets every week an Aliyah, whether he could get, an Avel doesn't get an Aliyah, right? Limud Torah doesn't do. So now what happens if he gets an Aliyah every Shabbat? So now that's Avelut b'fahesya b'tzibur if he doesn't get an Aliyah. So some have a custom to allow the rabbi, the chacham, if he gets every week to get. There's different minhagim, each to his own. Ravadia seems that not to give. But Ravadia also says, but the Vilna Gaon says that when he was in Avelut, he still took Hagbah. Because that wasn't an Aliyah, that's not Limud Torah. In the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in the Yalkut Yosef, in the Kitzur, he brings from Ravadia that an Avel Chatchila should not get Hagbah. If you called him up or whatever, there's a reason, and someone's going to get insulted. It seems like you could b'diavad, but Shatatchak, but L'Chatchila, an Avel shouldn't even get B'ticha, or Ravadia says they bring in the... And anytime I say Bavadia today, it's generally going to be the Yalkut Yosef, either in the Kitzur or in the regular Yalkut Yosef. It's really Reb David, it's his son, but if it's in Yabbi Yom, I'll point it out. But otherwise, like I said, most of what we have today from Bavadia is in the Yalkut Yosef.
You're saying, there's Avel in this Shiva.
B'toch Yimei Shiva. Yeah, Avel is B'toch Yimei Shiva. B'toch Yimei Shiva, where there's an Isur Limud Torah, so he doesn't get an Aliyah. Now the question is, Bavadia writes that even P'ticha and Hagbah he shouldn't get. I know, but like I said, by the Ashkenazim, the Vilna Gaon, it says, the Gaon Vilna, he did take the Hagbah, even though he didn't take, he didn't take Aliyah, he did take Hagbah. Now, the Mishnah Novot, the famous Mishnah Novot tells us, Rabbi Yossi Omer kol ha'mechabed et haTorah, gufo mechabed al habriot. A very famous Mishnah. Those who are mechabed the Torah, his guf will be mechabed, will have kavod from the briot, from people. V'chol mechabed et haTorah, chol mechalel et haTorah, Rahman al-Tzlan gufo mechalel al habriot. Right, that's a famous Mishnah, Perek Vav and Perkei Avot. Now, if you look at the regular Rishonim, the stamp shot is that someone is mechabed Torah, someone is mechabed mitzvot, but the Rambam, fellow Sfardi, right? Ashkenazim, we sit in the Beit Medrash of Sfardim kol hayom. We're surrounded by the Sfardim the whole day. I don't know what they're going to say. I know there's a famous joke. I could say this joke. I don't know. I should probably done this joke. Famous joke that when Reb Chaim Soloveitch got up to Shemayim, and he came with all the shilas in the Rambam, and the Rambam came out to give him the answer. He said, "Ma yodea Sephardi." Right? It's a joke. Please, it's being recorded. It's a joke. But it's a joke they make. But right, the Rambam says in Hilchat Sefer Torah Tefillin and Mezuzot, he says in Perek Yud Halacha Yud Aleph, Ma katuv b'Rambam. Kol mishi yoshev lefnei Sefer Torah yeshev b'koved rosh be'emav ha'fachad. Right, when the Sefer Torah is out, you're sitting there, you have to sit be'emav ha'fachad, earnestness, reverence. Right, they have to behave. And I tell my talmidim in school, the biggest kavod, by the Sfardim, it's a beautiful thing. Everyone runs up to be around the Sefer Torah. And I tell them, if you don't go back to your seat afterwards and you're standing around the bima and you're talking, is that lo kavod? Right? The biggest kavod is, all the halachot we're going to see. So he says, Kol mishoshev nei Sefer Torah yeshev bekoved rosh be'emav ha'fachad. Shehu ha'ed ha'ne'eman l'chol bo'e olam. The Sefer Torah is our aid to to everybody in this world that the Kadosh Baruch Hu exists and the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us. The Pasuk says in Dvarim Lamed Aleph, "V'hayesham b'chad le'ed v'chaddehu kefi kocho," the Rambam says. And therefore, since this is our connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu, we have to machabed the Torah kefi kocho. And then the Rambam continues, "Amru chachamim harishonim kol mechal et Torah gufo mechul al briot v'chol hamachabed et Torah gufo mechubed al briot." So the Rambam brings this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that most people, most Rishonim, don't learn has anything to do with Be'etzem Sefer Torah. We're talking about Torah and Mitzvot, but the Rambam attaches this Mishnah to Kavod for a Sefer Torah. The Maser Rokeach brings on this Rambam. It says, Kol zeh lamdu rabbeinu ma'amesechet sofrim. Where did the Rambam learn this idea and this whole Kavod Sefer Torah from? It says it comes from Masechet Sofrim. V'sham bi'aru od kama dvarim hanogim l'chvod Sefer Torah. Shekol ha'mechabdo mahadro harei kibet es Hashem. Someone who's mechabed and mahader Sefer Torah, that is giving kavod HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tashem ha'nichbad v'anora Baruch Hu. V'ashrei lo man no'im goralo, ashrei ha'am shekach lo, ashrei ha'am sh'Hashem elokav. That's the lashon of the Maser Rokeach. Giving honor to Sefer Torah is our way of giving honor to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh, the Sefer Torah is the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the only physical item that we have in this world. I should say it's the physical item that we have in this world that most connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in order for us to give some type of physical, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is ruchniot. It's not a physical. How could we, in a physical manner, show kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The Maser Rokeach says, that's al yedei giving kavod to a Sefer Torah. So when someone gives kavod to a Sefer Torah, it's not just like you're giving kavod to a chacham or to someone, we all know the Mishnah says someone who's mechabed horim or morim will come to kibbud Hashem. Now that's all there. But how can we show kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we are mechabed the Torah? And you think about it this way. Let's say you have an heirloom. I don't know how to say in Hebrew, an heirloom. You know what an heirloom is? You have the special thing that comes dor lachador. You have, that you keep in that chest, and everyone takes it out once a year, looks at it. It's from Saba, from Lefnei Matayim Shana, right? You have something that's 200 years old, right? Right now, if I came to the shuk and I tried selling that item, is it lo shaveh klum? Right? What's the whole shaveh of it? The shaveh of it is where it comes from. Is understanding me'efo zeba, where it comes from. That's how we have to understand. When we mechaber the Sefer Torah, it's like an heirloom. Now, of course, Sefer Torah today are very expensive, but you're not mechaber the Sefer Torah for the parchment. You're not mechaber the Sefer Torah for the ink or for the sofer. And don't get me wrong, it's beautiful to be mahader Sefer Torah, the rimonim, and kol davar. But we have to understand, it's when the Sefer Torah comes out, you have these new beautiful cases, it's silver, and it's gorgeous. I'm not saying not to do it, but you have to remember, it can't be wow, yesh kesef, the ramonim. That's not what it is. It's the Iker Kibbud is the Sefer Torah is understanding that this is the heirloom. This is Masha Yesh Lanu Me'akadosh Baruch Hu. And sometimes when there's so much of this stuff on it, we could forget and think of being mechabed. The beauty of the Gashmiut Shebo, the silver, the rimonim, and some of them are mamash beautiful. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying not to do it because that's the way being mahader the Sefer Torah maybe. But we have to remember when we see it, what are we? Is it that this is reminding us of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or is it reminding us how much money the guy who bought it paid in silver for this on the cover, right? The Torah, Kallah Mosif Migareya at some point, which means if it comes to the point where everyone who sees the Sefer Torah is always talking about the silver and the rim. It's not what it is. It's the heirloom. It's where the Torah comes from. This is the words. This is the Edut of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's so important to remember that, right? Now, in order to treat a Sefer Torah with proper kavod, you have to know the halachot of kavod. The mashal, let's say kavod hamet, right? So in Eretz Yisrael, there's a whole one way of kura without an aron. In Chutz La'aretz, we use an aron, and we know it has to be pine wood. The Gemara tells us tachrich. If we were writing the rules for the tachrichim for hamet, for what's covered on met, none of us would be giving the solid white shrouds, that how we do it. We would write, today, I don't know what goes on in the other countries, but in America, the goyim, they have the flower cars, and it looks, and people, and little kids look, wow, that's so nice. How come our levayot don't have? Because we know that kavod hamet is not what today's culture created. But kavod hamet is what? Is what Chachamim Zechronim Levracha taught us is kavod hamet. right? So the same thing with Kavod Sefer Torah. We can't get carried away from picking up differences from our culture of how they give kavod. If we want to know kavod Sefer Torah, there's only one way to know kavod Sefer Torah, is knowing Hilchot Sefer Torah. Going up, how you make the bracha, how you stand, not to lean on the bima, all those halachot that are so not often learned, right? It gets like, everyone always starts in the beginning, I always say like in Mishnah Berurah, right? Chelik Aleph gets learned 6 times, Chelik Gimel, Silchat Shabbat, and then around the Chagim, you do the Chagim. But Chelik Bet and Chelik Daled of Mishnah Berurah, which is Eruvin, and Chelik Bet, it falls by the wayside. You're laughing, I'm right, huh? And Kriyat Torah gets buried in there. But without learning Hilchot Kriyat Torah, the second sefer I wrote in Yarchei, I wrote on Kfiyas Suda, Birchat HaMazon, and the Tilat Times. I said, why you write on that? No one learns it. I said, I was hoping that maybe somebody would learn it, right? It doesn't get forgotten, but in order to be Mechaber Torah, you have to know how to walk up for an aliyah, how to walk down from aliyah. There's a minhag about his father, you see in many places, where after someone gets an aliyah, people walk down and people kiss his hand. Vadi screams strongly against it. There's many problems with it. I'm not going to go to you don't kiss in a Beit Knesset. There's other she'elot, but somehow it crept into society, like certain things did, and people don't know. It's not kavod for the Sefer Torah to do that, right? It's not kavod. The Sefer Torah is out. You don't walk around kissing the people. Right? So in order to know how to be mechaber Torah, what's the first thing? You have to know halacha. You have to learn the halachot. Another important reason to know Hilchot Sefer Torah is, I don't know except sometimes Hilchat Shabbat at home, there's almost no other halacha that so often you need an instant al hamakom psak and there's no rabbi around. Right? You go to the shtiblach to daven, you go to daven, right? How many of you daven by minyanim and their chacham is not at that minyan? Right? Now, how many times do you have a she'elah and Hilchos Kriyat Torah, or something happens, and you need to know now, right? In the kitchen, yesh bayah, so you call the rabbi. If not, you put supper aside, you find something else to eat till you get a psak. You put the plate aside. In Hilchot Shabbat, most things don't need instant. You could find out after Shabbat, or you could, wait a half hour, walk to the rabbi. But Hilchot Kriyat Torah, you're not putting everything on hold and going to find, get a hold of a rabbi. So it should be one of the most learned halachot, and unfortunately it's the least learned halachot, because it's halacha that you need ala makom. You put away a Sefer Torah after the ta'ut, or you don't put away the Sefer Torah. Is this a ta'ut that's mechayev? And guess what? What happens when you put a Sefer Torah? One of the most complicated halachot in Kriyat Torah, when I put out the book, people ask me if I'm going to touch on it. I said, I can't skip it. But if you learn halacha, you'll see this. Hamon achronim on this. And there's so many different minhagim. And then there's whole machloket, what do your place doesn't have a minhag. Every rabbi says what should be the minhag, right? When you find a ta'ut in a Sefer Torah, and I'm not going to tell you what to do here because, like I said, we have Moroccan, so everyone does something else. But this is what you have to know. Let's say you find the ta'ut in a Sefer Torah, and now you have to put away the Sefer Torah and take out a different Sefer Torah. What do you do now? Does the person who had aliyah make a bracha achrona on this Sefer Torah, and then the next aliyah begins on the next Sefer Torah? If the next aliyah begins from the Sefer Torah, does he go back to the beginning of this aliyah the ta'ut was found, or do you continue from where you left off? Do you start giving 7 brand new aliyot from this point, and you discount all the previous aliyot, right? So all these she'elot is what to do, right? Usually you need an answer ala makom. You need on the spot. So everyone has to know in the shul what your minhag is. You sit down. Someone came to me after I put out the sefer and said, he was a gabbai for 25 years in the shul. There's so many shilas. There's no sefer that encompasses all the questions a gabbai could come up with. Not just in Kriyat Torah, and Misha Beirachs, and all different things. The Chazan comes in, Chazan went up to the Amidla. So I said to him, the problem with such a sefer is that it would be thousands of pages long with every shita. I said, if you want to put out such a sefer Torah, it should have only questions. Put down your 30 years of questions, and then the sefer should have blank lines. You meet with your rabbi. He gives what he wants the minhag hamakom to be, and then you'll have a sefer. But nobody could put out a sefer that's going to be universal on what to do on these types of questions, right? And because some of them are not, I'm being recorded, some of these are not really halacha. They're various minhagim that evolved over the years. It comes to the Misha Beirachs and how it's done, when you say hashkava, kelmale, whatever you call it, when you don't say it, and who you say it for. Right? A lot of this evolved in different countries over the years. Even different Hasidim do things differently, right? And it comes to me Chazan, and where the Chazan sends with tal, not tal, all these types of things. One shul to another, It's so different. Such a sefer would have questions, not answers. Yeah.
So would that be considered to be a Torah tzibur? Because let's say if you're delaying things between Aliyah.
So,
that's like you're saying, the Mishaberach or the Shkava or the...
So Techa de Tzibura is a very, very good question, dealt with throughout halacha. And in Hilchot Beit HaKnesset, in Hilchot Kriyat Torah, you see it many times. Right? The halacha tells us that I didn't even get to start what I was talking about, the halachot that I was going to talk about, but one of those is you take out a Sefer Torah and you realize that it wasn't rolled to the right place. Do you put it back in, or do you roll it to the right place? So the Chidan Machzik Bracha says you roll it to the right place. Mordechai Feinstein writes, it depends where it's up to, and depends on your tzibur. He says if you have a crowd that's going to get itchy, and it's a long road where you have to go, and it's quicker to put it away and take it out, Techat Tzibura Adif.
It's not
So that's the She'elah. The Machzik Bracha, the Chidah says, Al Tzkavod Torah, you don't put it back. Right? And that's generally our custom, is that we would roll it. But I'm telling you, Moshe Feinstein, Nigrat Moshe, he writes that, you have to know what you're up to. I mean, you took out, let's just think, on Pashat Bereshit, and you open it up, and you realize this one's still at Vizot HaBracha. Right? And your tzibur. You're going to lose your tzibur. Let's just imagine that by the time you finish rolling it, half are going to be outside in the Kiddush club, and they're not going to hear Kriyat Torah. You have to know your tzibur, Are they the type to... Or let me another question. Kavod HaTorah, to use this Torah. But is it Kavod HaTorah that while you're going to be rolling it, everyone's going to be talking? That's even worse, maybe. Probably in halacha worse, because the Isur to speak when the Sefer Torah is out, the bizayon of talking when the Sefer Torah is a much bigger bizayon than switching a Sefer Torah l'cha'ora, if you look at how it's brought, right? So you're going to be rolling it, and you're going to have everybody talking. And then I'll tell you another problem. Do you think they're going to keep quiet when you're done? All the conversations are going to stop. Baruch Hu et Hashem Haran. I don't think so. We've been around the block, right? So the Moshe says you have to know your crowd. You have to know your crowd. You have to know how far the rolling is, and you have to know your crowd. So, of course, the Chidah says it's a kavod. If you realize right away, you have to, the best is to use this Sefer Torah. And if it's a small amount of roll, but you have to know your crowd. I have a minyan. I'm not here to advertise it. I have a minyan Shabbat in Passaic, New Jersey. Where I'm a rabbi. It's called Zeira Agudath Yisrael. It's a minyan for Bachrim. Okay. Where I tell people, Megil Shnei Mesrei Ad Hatalit, because by Ashkenaz we know where Talit get married, right? And this minyan was started why? Because so many Bachurim, as you all know in your own shuls, don't have the savlanut for how long your shuls take, right? And the Sfardim take even longer than the Ashkenazim. You deal with selling daliyot for half hour. I know the Mishaberach, so we started a minyan for Bachurim. We start 8:30 in the morning. It's not later than the shuls, but it doesn't go much faster. But we took out everything, extra. Right? We mispalel, this Kriyat Torah, except the basic Mishaberach, Musaf, and that's it. So it's an hour and a half. And then we have a Kiddush, but obviously Cholent and Kugel, it helps. Right? What's the point? People ask me, why did I start the minyan? I say, let me answer your question. How long, what happens in your shul? You make a Mishaberach l'cholim, with Ashkava, and all the kids go outside. Where are they for Musaf? Right? They come back in, their Musaf Shemona Esrei is somewhere between the conversation that they were having, that then has to continue as soon as they finish the Amidah. You're shaking your heads, you know what I'm talking about, right? Then maybe they jump back in for Kedusha if someone called them in. You're laughing, you know what I'm talking about, right? So we start a minyan, no one goes out. Avachad. Because it's for them, But so, and people realize, so you have to realize, Kavod Sefer Torah, we have to sometimes realize what's better and what's worse. Like you say, putting it back, we all think that that's not the kavod, but if instead Kriyat Torah is going to look like what it's going to look like, that's going to be worse. You have to make a shikul adat sometimes. And so it's important to know Hilchot Kriyat Torah. That's just a beautiful thing that they did this whole program now, because, like I said, so many shailot come up. You need to know on the spot the answer. So let's just talk about some of the regular shailot will come up, right? Like, let's say you sell aliyot. Like most Sfardim sell aliyot, all right? Now, they sell kohen also. And a lot of Batei Knesset, by the Sfardim, there's a lot of kohanim, right? But Vadia says you have to be careful. That if you sell all your aliyot Monday, Thursday, Shabbat, you have to once in a while not sell it. Because if a kohen has to buy his own aliyah, what happened? Why do we give a kohen the first aliyah? Pasuk v'kidashto. Yeah, the big kiddush when he has to go buy his own one. Are you being mechabed him? Oh, so you lowered the amount of people who are bidding on it, right? But Rav Vadia says, it's in the Agudath and Shulchan Aruch, that a shul that's always selling aliyot should every once in a while make sure not to sell kohen, to make sure to be mechabed a kohen. That it should be a kiyum of the kiddashto. Right? How many people thought of that ever? But that's what he brings, and it's buried there in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's not like somewhere in the body, but it's there. But how many people ever thought of that? Right? What happened to the kiddashto? He also points out, Rabbi Vadia, you have to be very careful. In some shuls, it takes a nice long time for the selling, and he says there's Kallah Rosh going on. He says you have to be very careful that it's done with Muchubat. You're in a Beit Knesset. It's right before Kriyat Torah. This is all for the Torah, and if it's going to come Kallah Rosh or start fighting, it's also that's not Kavod Torah. What are you doing it for? People think that they're going to spend more money on Aliyah, right, and do it in a way that takes away Kavod Ben Adam, but somehow they're being mechabed the Kavod Torah. You all have been to shuls that you know what I'm talking about, I think, right? That's not Kavod, I tell Avelim that sometimes the biggest Kavod it could do for the niftar is not to daven for the Amud, right? Because the machloket that it's going to make, someone else came in, and you're toch to Shana, and you live in the ear. He's toch shloshim, but he doesn't live in the ear. So you have the right to say, because I'm a kavua here, and you have the right. Halacha, black and white, shachul lavan, you might be right. You think that's a chus for the niftar? Who are we kidding? Right? What big is a chus for the niftar would it be if you mevater and you say the kaddishim? And the Kadosh Baruch Hu sees your mother taught you well, your father taught you well. That's the kavod. So of course there's an inyan to be mitpal for Amud, and now people who could tell you, Kol Hashana, they never missed. And it doesn't impress me. Because I can't believe that in 365, okay, minus Shabbat, Chag, it depends on Chodesh if you don't, times it by 3, that there was never a machloket when you took the Amud. Statistically, maybe you were in a shul, but statistically speaking, right? There's going to be times when you stood up because you felt that way. But had you not done it, maybe that would bring yoter kavod for the niftar. Same thing here when it comes. We're fighting for kavod HaTorah. We have to make sure we're fighting for real kavod HaTorah. If it's not real kavod HaTorah, so what are we fighting for? Something to think about in Kriyas HaTorah. When you do pticha, so by the Ashkenazim, have you ever been daven by Ashkenazim? So when there's 2 Sifrei Torah, today most shuls do what? They send one person Peticha. He takes out the first Sefer Torah, and he gives it to the Chazan. Then he takes out the second Sefer Torah, and if the Gabbai was able to find a third person, he hands it to the third person. If not, he gets stuck walking with it, right? You know how it is. Then he goes to his seat. He holds the Sefer Torah, right? But the Sharei Ephraim tells us that that's not real Kavod HaTorah. Real Kavod HaTorah is the first person who takes out the Sefer Torah, he gives it to the Chazan, and he is melave the Chazan, and that Sefer Torah he took out to the Aron, to the Bima, and only the second person takes out the second Sefer Torah. Someone who's knowing like that, but it's the point. And he tells us like this, the Sharei Ephraim tells us, and I didn't see this in the Yalkut Yosef. I know they told me this morning only that it's going to be a Sfaradish group, so I tried to put together in a couple hours, with the Sfaradishim and hug him as best I could. But the Sharei Ephraim tells us that whoever goes Pticha has to be Malave the Sefer Torah all the way to the Bima. Meaning Kavod HaTorah is that everybody comes closer. Everyone tries to kiss it. Even, and this Rav Vadia brings the Yarchei Yosef, but it's even Ashkenazim. Even the Nashim and the Ezra Nashim, it says, should come closer. Rav Vadia points out to be careful that they don't come into the men's section. Obviously, he knew places where it was a problem. I think, probably years ago it was more of a problem. But they should walk closer because that shows their kavod that they're trying to get closer. They can't come all the way, but they're getting closer. And everyone moves a little bit out of that seat to be malava. You can't all be malava to the bima. But the person who went paticha, and by this Sfardim, sometimes it's 2 or 3 people, because one person opens it up, one person takes it out, one person does the rimonim, right? I got it, yeah? Right? But those who take out the Sefer Torah, I don't know about the rimonim, but the person who took out the Sefer Torah, he should be malava the Sefer Torah all the way to the bima. That's kavod HaTorah. Just like you malava a guest and a person, you understand? Right? We know the whole sugi of Egel HaRufa comes from what? Not being malava a guest. You held the Sefer Torah, you malava the Sefer Torah all the way to the bima. And in Ashkenazi shul, if you go Hagbah, the person who went Hagbah, the halacha tells us, is supposed to not just give the Sefer Torah to the Chazan and bye-bye. He has to be malava all the way to the Aron HaKodesh. So few people know this halacha. He's supposed to be malava the Sefer Torah all the way to the Aron HaKodesh. Everybody else a little bit and waits, but the person who held the Sefer Torah, he should be malava all the way to the Sefer Torah. Another point that Ravadia brings out is by Ito Rimonim, is that in most shuls, right, opening the Aron is a bigger kavod than putting on the Rimonim. So you have to be careful when you mechabed a Rebbe and a Talmud, or a father and his son, that you don't give the stronger kibud to the child, and we'll call the lesser of the two kibudim to the father, or Rebbe Talmud. Because here everyone's watching, and what's happening? The greater kibbutz going to the child or the Talmud, and the greater and the lesser kibbutz is going. So Ravadia points out that where possible. Now, it doesn't say it's a sur. It doesn't say that it can't be mechila. But when you want to be mechabed, you have to know the rules of kavod. That's real kavod, right? So we spoke about it already. I had to talk about when the wrong Sefer Torah was taken out. So we spoke about that already. We said the Chidah says it's better to just roll it. The Moshe says it depends where it's holding.
No, not the wrong Sefer.
Well, yeah, because you had a different Sefer Torah rolled already to Bereshit. Right. It's very important. You should know. Part of the job of a gabbai, all the poskim say, is to make sure the Sefer Torah are rolled in advance. It's not proper kavod for the tzibur, and it's not proper kavod for the Torah to be rolled when everyone's sitting there waiting. It's both. It's not proper kavod. Now, when the Sefer Torah is opened, so there's a whole machloket. Once you open the Sefer Torah, you have to show the person who's getting the aliyah where he's going to start from. Right? And then there's a whole machloket. Do you close the Sefer Torah to make the brachot, or do you leave it open? Right? So the custom of most Sfardim is they leave the case open, and then they put talit, or today the fancy cases come with something to pull across, or the brachot to pull that across. And it's not like if you know the brachot, you shouldn't pull it across. It's bedafka. It shouldn't look like you're reading the brachot from inside the Sefer Torah. It's not a mistake. The Ramah says that if you leave the Sefer Torah open, you shouldn't look inside, so you should look away. So he says you should look to the left, because when you look to the left, it's the Yamin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We look at it as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is facing us. His Yamin, so you should look to the left. But I always point out to people that in many Batei Knesiyot, they have written down the brachot. So if you're going to look to the left, and you're going to make a ta'ut in the bracha, or you're going to look to the right and get the brachot properly, of course, even the Ramah would say you should get the brachot properly. This is a typical example, when I say, of people sometimes mixing up halacha with the way it's supposed to be done. Al pi halacha. You understand? Because they see the Ramah says to turn to the left. And there's a lot of examples like this, if you really think about it in life, where you get tied up on thinking you read something, but you don't understand the downside in this moment of what you're doing. Right? And it's so important that the brachot should be said properly. Right? If a person made a mistake and by mistake said the after bracha before, so we all hold that he makes the first bracha after the aliyah. What happens if then again he made a mistake? Right? And let's say he said the first bracha, and then he said the first bracha again. So if he's before the chatima habracha of Baruch Atah Hashem, so then he goes back. But once the chatima was said, that's it. That's the bracha, and you leave that bracha. What happens, a Kohen, let's say, it could happen to anybody, but especially this is much more prevalent by a Kohen, because a Kohen has to have the aliyah. What happens if he's in the middle of Kriyat Shema? So, Ravadia says, that's it, he doesn't get the aliyah. Birchat Kriyat Shema and Psukei de Zimra, the best is he should not get the aliyah. The best is, but then he should go outside, if he's the only Kohen. If there's other Kohanim, you give it to somebody else. If he was called up already, so you all know the Chazal warn us that it's a big bizayon if you're called up for a Sefer Torah and you don't go. So if it's in Birchat Kriyat Shema, or it's in Psukei Zimra, and the person who was called, he can go. But Chatchili should not be called. And Ravadia says that if you're the only Kohen and you realize you're in the middle of Psukei Zimra or Birchat Kriyat Shema, the best is to walk out. Now, someone asked me, and I said, you have to ask your own Rav. It's a good question. What happens if you're in a shul, you're in the middle of Birchat Kriyat Shema, or Psukei Zimra, you're the only Kohen, but they don't know you're a Kohen. You're davening in Shtiblach, they don't know. So do you have to walk out and just keep quiet and keep on davening? I don't know. I never saw it brought in the poskim. Usually we say the Kohen should go out, because otherwise it's a pegam l'kuhna. If no one knows he's a Kohen, so you're right, maybe next week they're going to see you somewhere else, and they'll remember last week. So it's probably best to go out, but if you're middle and it's a big disturbance and they don't know you're Kohen, what? Sorry, what?
Unless they call him by his name.
No, once he's called up, no, yeah.
No, he's a Kohen.
You don't a Kohen. Let's say you're in Shtiblach. You know, you're davening these places, many minyanim. They don't know you're a Kohen. You're sitting there. So I don't know. Do you have to tell them? Do you have to walk out, or can you just keep quiet and keep on davening? And they don't know you're a Kohen, and it's not a Piyam. Of course, if everybody knows you're a Kohen, you're davening in a regular shul, you should walk outside, and you should tell the gabbai not to give you the aliyah.
So the job of the gabbai is to say, is there a Kohen in the shul? No?
Yeah, but you don't answer. So if you don't
He
answer,
can lift his hand.
no, we're talking about lechatchila during Psukei Zimra and Birchat Kriyat Shema. He should not be mafsik to get aliyah.
No, not. But you say I'm a Kohen, but I'm.
No, you don't say anything.
No, but I'm telling you, you're definitely better off. If you don't want, best is to walk out. If you don't want to walk out, at least don't say you're a Kohen. This way, there's no question of pegam l'kuhuna. If you don't get aliyah and there's a Kohen, it looks like it's a pegam to your kuhuna. So therefore, he could just keep quiet.
To ask a Kohen to leave, to bring somebody, that's a pekam.
Okay, so asking a Kohen to leave. You see, this is it's a good question that you're asking. It's a very, very good question that you're asking. So unfortunately, this is one of the things where American Western culture has crept in. What do I mean by that? You have a bit milah that day and a chatan. You have two chiyuvim, right? And even though some Ashkenazim, it's not a minhag, we'll add a fourth aliyah on a chatan, but it's called Yom Simchato. We don't, and the Sfardim definitely don't. Everybody says not to. It's not what happens. There are halachot about who gets the aliyah, and you have to know it. The gabbai has to know it. The rules of kedima. Nowhere in halacha does it say the kohen should go out, or to ask the kohen not to go out. If you want to v'kidashto, he doesn't go out. The one person gets the aliyah. Now, if a kohen realizes what's going on, and he wants to walk out on his own, of course, no one could say that it's not a beautiful thing for him to walk out on his own. Right? He can walk out on his own, and he's a mensch. And he's a mensch. No, there's no isur for him to walk out. There's no isur, because only he's getting an aliyah of v'kidashto. Meaning there's an inyan of v'kidashto. There's a kohen there, you mekadesh the kohen, and he gets the first aliyah. But if there's no kohen there, there's no kohen there. He doesn't have to be there. There's no isur for him to walk out. But asking him to walk out, that's basically saying, I have an obligation now to honor you, and I'm going to say to you, please walk out. And nowhere in halacha does it say to do that. It says what to do when you only have one aliyah and you have two chiyuvim. It says not to ask the kohen to go out. So, yes, I've seen in many, many shuls where the gabbai will ask a kohen to go out. I don't think it's appropriate. If the gabbai wants to walk over to the kohen and tell him, quietly before, that today we have a problem in the shul, and we're going to have a goral, if that's the rules, or we're going to have to go with kedima, and one of the chiyuvim are not going to get an aliyah. And he gets the hint and he walks out. So he walks out. But to ask him, before Kriyat Torah is about to start, you're about to call up the first person, and you tell the Kohen to walk out. I mean, really? That's v'kidashto? That doesn't make sense. It's another place where people today, they learn the Shulchan Aruch, they learn black and white halacha, and they don't realize what's al pi halacha. You know what I'm saying? You can't ask a Kohen. It's not appropriate to ask a Kohen to walk out. What?
Penalizing also the Levi by doing that.
You're penalizing the Levi, but we generally in halacha don't see that as a penalty to, that the Levi is obligated to get an aliyah, that it's a penalty on him, But that's a story. On a fast day, only those fasting get aliyot. Now, if it's Monday or Thursday in Shacharit, or Yom Kippur Shacharit, where there's Kriyat Torah, even if it wasn't a fast day, many poskim are lenient if someone's a chiyuv to give them an aliyah. Anyway, not by mincha, but by a Kriyat Torah. Let's say a fast day falls out on Monday and Thursday. So that Kriyat Torah would take place even if it wasn't a fast day. Right? It would be a different Kriyat, but there would be a Kriyat Torah. So many are lenient to allow a person who's not fasting to get an aliyah then, if he's a chiyuv, if there's a reason to give him an aliyah. And in Yom Kippur, there's a whole machloket achronim, Yom Kippur by mincha, even if you could give him, I'm not going to go into that now, but I definitely want to mincha by Tzfar. But like I said, on a tanit, like by mincha, or a time where, if it's not Monday or Thursday, the whole kriyah is only because we're fasting, someone fasting should get the aliyah.
In a regular case, if it's a kohen and he's not fasting, what do you do?
He should go outside. He should go out. Right. So if it's Monday or Thursday, you probably could give him the aliyah. If it's not, he doesn't get the aliyah. Right, I understand. So if it's on a Monday or Thursday where there's a Kriyat Torah anyway, he could get the aliyah. But then he shouldn't get the aliyah. They should get aliyah. The best is for him to go out. He should go out because it takes away any problem. But yeah, sure. Yeah, in a nice way.
So if you can explain to him and he decides to walk out, then said
100%. 100%. Right. 100%. I want to finish off with a very, and I'll take questions afterwards. I'll stay a few minutes and answer questions. There's a chidah, Machzik Bracha says, an amazing, amazing thing. He says it's in Siman Reish Pei Beis in Sifkat Yadalat if you want to look it up. He brings Hora'at Echad Min HaGedolim. He doesn't even say the name, but if the chidah says Echad Min HaGedolim, we can agree with that, right? Good. The Misha Nadav Sefer Torah LeBeit HaKnesset. Someone donated a Sefer Torah to Beit HaKnesset. V'karu bo bayom haShabbat harishon l'netina. Now the first Shabbat, going to read his Torah. This is his day. V'nimtza bo ta'ut. Tigomrin bo hakriya tahavale kichatan she'en ro'im nigo b'chupato. He brings from Echad min HaGedolim that even if the Sefer Torah is pasul, this is his day. Just like a Kohen would not go over and rule a tzarat. And the Kohen sees him on his chuppah. The Kohen knows that's a tzarat. He has to keep quiet. Because we know a tzarat is not considered a tzarat until the Kohen makes it a tzarat. He has to keep quiet. Says, Machzik Bracha b'shem Echad min HaGedolim. The same thing with the Sefer Torah. Now I'm going to tell you the Machzik Bracha finishes it off. The Einlis Mochal Zeh Klal. That the Torah is important. So why do you think he brings this? Why would the Machzik Bracha bring this if he's going to say not to be somech on it? And I'm going to tell you the answer. Because he is here in Kriyat Torah telling us a very important lesson, like I was telling you before, in understanding whether it's the guy going up to be a chazan, or all these times when it comes to kavod. He's telling us, remember that kavod ben Adam can't be trampled on for kavod of the Sefer Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us. They say in English, I don't know if I should say this on a recording, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Ever heard that before? Right? So that's what he's telling us. He's telling us, and the Machzik Bracha is warning us, that in Kriyat Torah, there are so many times when we've seen so many machloket, so many times when Ben Adam were standing up for their kavod, maybe that they really do deserve, right? But you have to realize, the kavod, the biggest kavod HaTorah sometimes, the Sefer Torah is out. The biggest kavod HaTorah sometimes is the kavod to the Ben Adam. And how many times are we in the Beit HaKnesset? And it seems that some people have forgotten that. And that's what he tells us. Even it tells us not to be somech on it. And I think that if we want to be zocheh, to have kavod HaTorah, and to have Mashiach tzidkeinu meher v'yameinu, we have to remember never to let kavod ben Adam be trampled. For our kavod, we're thinking that this is what the kavod HaTorah is. Of course, everything has to be done al pi halacha, but you have to remember kavod ben Adam is also so important. Thank you for listening. I'll take questions. Shalot. Okay, yeah, Shalot.
What happens if somebody in the shul, if you know, let's say, I'll give you an example, decided that Savatenu, he cheated on his wife. He left, and then they got divorced, but he stayed with the girl, the lady is a goya. He got married to her.
Could he get an aliyah? That's your question.
Can you get aliyah? And back, 1 second, just a little further in. Usually, and this guy is a very good Balkori, very good. So when he goes to aliyah, he always reads. Can we give him an aliyah?
I don't think it matters if he reads or not. Okay. Someone who's married to a goya at the time, I think a Ravad is very,
he converted her, but he converted her during the process that he was.
So there are some Averot that it talks about you need to do tshuva first before you get aliyah again, and some Averot, like it says a kohen, that goes with someone he's not allowed to go marry as a grusha, right? It seems over there that it's not good enough that he gets divorced, but he has to come to like the rabbi or the Beit Din and say that he's not going to do it again, that he values his kahuna. When it comes to other aliyot, Bavadia seems to say that we do give people who are not Shomrei Torah mitzvot aliyot, not to push them further away. So, but that's a very, very different question than a person who knows better and who decides to marry a goya. Then he shows up to a simcha, and we want to give him the aliyah because he's a rich man, and we want to be, mechabed his kesef. That there are many, many poskim who are very vehemently opposed to. Whereas, let's say you have a person who is a tinok shenishba, right? And he married a goya and he comes to shul and you want to be mekari of him. Most poskim say for kiruv. You have to remember, what's the biggest problem with giving him the bracha? Is the bracha. You have to remember that if a guy's not ma'amin HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his bracha is not a bracha. So I'm saying, so just you have to be careful. So now, if a person's a ma'amin and he's living with a goya, so you have to figure out how that works. At what point do we say, I mean this in a good way. The Sfardim are much better at it than Ashkenazim. Most of the Ashkenazim are happy to be atheists. The Sfardim, you meet them, and I work with them every day. Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim be'etzem in emunah. So you say the bracha they really believe in, and that could be true. So when Moshe talks about it, there was a question of them having emunah. But as far as they have emunah, so there's less a shayla on the bracha. But if you look in Ravad and Yaakov Yosef, he talks about it in a few different places. They talk about the Reform, the Conservative, and he seems to frown upon giving someone an aliyah unless there's really, someone who's an overt ba'ala ve'raha, unless there's a reason of kiruv, or he's a tinik shenishba. So in every individual case, you need a chacham who understands the whole background, what's happening, and why is the aliyah being given. It can't be taken lightly. It's such a shayla, and it's not one answer for everybody. Yeah.
Why you mentioned that the Gilila should be with an aliyah? Why is that?
Well, that's the mashmor. That's the question: is how to understand the Gemara. The good question of the Gemara, the question how to understand the Gemara is the one who went Gilila, one of those who got an aliyah.
Why?
Why would it be attached to an aliyah?
Yeah, meaning if the Gilila is a huge thing in itself, why do you need it to be? Why even?
So today we don't. But the mashmos from the Gemara is that those who got called up to the Sefer Torah, those were the ones who took part now in the Kriyat HaTorah. So you take someone who took part in the Kriyat HaTorah to do the Glila. And someone who didn't take part, you don't. That's the mashma'ut. Like I said, it's my big machlok in Yerushalayim that's in the Gemara, but that's how those understand the Gemara.
So
that's the case.
even today?
Today not. Today I don't think anybody has the minhag today to do it that way.
This chashivut of the Gillah today, would you say it's applicable to say that Gillah is the biggest?
Everybody agrees with that. No one disagrees that Notas Chah connected to Kulan.
That's not how people look.
Unfortunately.
But that's
But yeah. Like I said, the Mechaber says, Maran Bet Yosef says it should sell. It says for the most money of more aliyot. And like I said, unfortunately, it's no longer viewed by people that way. It's unfortunate. I tell you that when I was younger, I was very scared to go Hagbah. I was going to drop it. But after, many years ago, like the taxi driver, when I got Sechel, and I learned the halacha, I haven't turned down a Hagbah since, unless I think it's really too heavy that I'm going to drop it. Because, you see, that Adarabah, if you're going to come to me and say, sometimes I go to a simcha in the family, and I know they're going to want to give me an aliyah, I tell them, if you need, Hagbah is fine. Like, they always figure out who they're going to have to give Hagbah to. Like, it's the last they give. That's aliyah, because that's our mindset today. And I tell them, Hagbah is fine. Don't worry, Hagbah is fine, Okay, we'll stop over here. If anybody wants to buy a copy of the safe, I have a few here in Eretz Yisrael only.
Just one last question. I was